Down Wall Street, the Federal Hall is going to be right down here. It's the New York Stock Exchange. This is actually it. That scaffold's been up as long as I can remember, and it's New York, so it's crowded. George Washington is what this place is all about. George Washington took his first inaugural address here. This was the first capital of the United States. Time to go inside and check out what's inside Federal Hall. So we're going up to 15 Pine Street. The temporary entrances while they do all the work on Federal Hall, because you can't go in through the front door. It was the home of the first Congress of the United States, first Supreme Court, and first head of the country. For those who aren't familiar with the history, Southern states weren't too happy with the idea of New York being capital of the country, so it was moved. Yeah, this looks like the entrance. Okay, we're inside Federal Hall now, and they actually have a model of the original Federal Hall right in here, which is really cool, 1703 to 1788. So this is not the original building, obviously. This site has a lot of history. You can see everything that was here. Common Council, the legislative body of the city, courts, libraries. This was City Hall from 1703 to 1788. General Assembly of the colony met here. New York State legislature after independence between 1785 and 1788. City Hall served as the home of the United States Congress under the Articles of Confederation. Best remembered for the libel trials of Peter Zenger, the printer, 1735, and Alexander McDougall, leaders of the New York Sons of Liberty in 1770. So we also had famous court cases held on the site, and that would be in this building, not the building we're standing in, but in this building. In 1788, a name that we see a lot historically, Pierre L'Enfant is picked to remodel City Hall for use as a national capital, and they rename it to Federal Hall. So here we go with Federal Hall coming in, that's 1788, and you can see the reasons why. The view of the ancient Roman architecture, they change it over, they put the eagle on it, the Great Seal of the U.S., a row of 13 stars and olive branches, flags with clusters of arrows. So in this building, the United States Constitution was put into practice. Washington, Adams, Hamilton, Jefferson, and Madison all worked here. Within the government's first 18 months, the Bill of Rights was passed, a court system was created, and executive departments were established. The building stood until 1812 when it was demolished. But we're standing in the very location where it happens. This would have been the building that was here when all the Bill of Rights was signed. Hamilton, Jefferson, Madison, George Washington, John Adams. This is where they would have stood. That building's no longer here, but the location stands right here. The streets are here, and you can walk on the very ground where they walked. Let's show you the building that's here now. Here's what you got. This is what comes in to replace Federal Hall sometime later, actually 1842. Why? Well, interesting you should ask. It comes in because New York becomes a center of trade. And for 78 years, this becomes the Customs House. And as it moves in, you also get the important point of collecting treasury. So from 1862 to 1920, it becomes part of the New York branch of the Treasury system. And there's a display here telling you about that. But the Customs House is very important. At some point, I'll probably do a video about the old Customs House, which is now part of the Smithsonian. You can see inside these rooms hundreds of clerks and inspectors counting sort of bills, notes, search for counterfeit money, and wrote pension checks to Civil War veterans, interestingly enough. So this building continued to have great impact right through 1920. Okay, remember I said this was the Customs House and part of the Treasury? Here's something you don't see everywhere. Let's take a look. Because it was a Customs House, you would have had not only money, merchandise kept inside a vault. They let us get a peek inside the old vault. Let's see what else we can find. So normally the Washington Bible, the Bible that George Washington used at his inauguration, is stored here at Federal Hall on the day I'm visiting. It's off-site for restoration or for preservation. But this is the physical location where Washington was inaugurated as the first president of the United States, credited with keeping the Union together. For those who aren't familiar with the statements made about Washington, first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his fellow citizens, George Washington was able to unify a nation. The town was divided, a series of 13 colonies that couldn't really agree as to whether or not they wanted to be a nation. But they rallied behind one man, just as the Continental Army had, to form one nation. And this is the location of that inaugural speech. If you're wondering what does survive of the original Federal Hall, right in front of us is what's listed as the stone, which is part of the balcony where George Washington stood to take that inaugural oath back in 1789 to become the first president of the United States. Remember, George Washington at the end of his second term turned down the opportunity to run for a third term for the good of the nation. He was asked to, but he turned it down. He put the country first at all times. What a wonderful place to visit. It's in New York, downtown Wall Street, across the street from the New York Stock Exchange. Think of the history made here. I'm now in the middle of the Rotunda, and I'm not sure that this can do justice to what I'm seeing, but it really is spectacular, and I'll try to pan up and give you a feel for the entire Rotunda. It's absolutely beautiful. As we look up, it looks very much like the Capitol. I'm going to give you a look at that ceiling, that beautiful skylight. It's up at the top of it. Begin panning. Start to see a little bit of what's up there. And I know that it's probably a little hard for you to truly visualize the size and the scale. But this building is just beautiful. And it brings back views of a bygone era. Well, they say it's 1703. This was the northern edge of the city. It no longer was by the time everything grew up around it. By 1790, the city had become much larger, and it was renamed Federal Hall when it began operating under the Constitution. 1842, this building was opened, and it was called the Customs House, and you can see why. It's within walking distance of New York Harbor, then the world's busiest harbor. I'm going to show you something else that's really neat over here. 1790, New York lost its bid to become the capital city. The federal government moved to Philadelphia, and then in 1800 to newly built Washington, D.C. From 1955 to the present, I love this. After 1920, the building was used by the FBI, the Passport Office, and other government agencies. In 1955, it was designated Federal Hall National Memorial, part of the National Park System. And given the history that occurred here, it's wonderful to see it and wonderful to visit it. So if you're in New York, this is someplace you probably want to drop by. It's free admission, and you can walk through history. And when you're standing outside, think of who walked there. John Adams, George Washington, Madison, Hamilton, they all walked these streets. The banking system was debated out there. This is Wall Street. It all happened here. You can see some of the more famous statements: no taxation without representation. Truth will be the test for libel. The events that occurred here shaped the nation. On this site, some of the foundations on which this nation was built are still debated to this day. Were built into the Constitution, were resolved in the courts. And if you consider those issues important, perhaps this is a place you want to visit if you're in New York.